So I know this is a little bit hard to see. Maybe you can, get up close to your screen. But here's all the stuff that takes place before the Acts 13 first missionary journey. Help me walk through it again. The first place they went was Damascus, and then Arabia, and then Jerusalem and Judea, right? And then to Tarsus, which is in Cilicia. So that's at least 4 separate missionary journeys. And then Barnabas, who's likely heard that Paul is active. Barnabas is probably not thinking to 8 years ago when Paul was really active, let me go get that guy. I don't know what he's doing these days. He's probably heard Paul's been very active, and Paul has more experience with Gentiles and Gentile believers, that he goes and gets Paul and says, we need help in Antioch. Something incredible is happening there. Come and join me there. That's the 5th missionary journey, because Paul is there for several years. So that's at least 5 missionary journeys. And this little map, this says Paul's early travels before the first missionary journey. There's at least 5, it looks like to me, from before Acts 13. Which is just mind-boggling to me that somebody decided that leaving Antioch was the first missionary journey, because all of this is in the scripture. I'm not making any of this up. It's all right there. Now, then we get to the first journey, or you can say, or maybe the 6th. This looks like the 6th to me, at least. They leave, Paul and Barnabas leave Antioch. They are a team. From this point on, Paul never does any ministry alone, and it looks like he probably did, going, maybe because all the Christians were afraid of him before this, going to Damascus and then going to Arabia and then going to Tarsus. Those all seem to have been by himself. There's no mention of anybody else. From this point on, maybe because of the influence of Barnabas, Paul is always on a team. And this first team was Paul and Barnabas. So they go to Cyprus, where Barnabas has relatives and is deeply connected there. Then they go over, they do ministry there. Then they go over to Pisidia. They land at Perga. Then they go up to Pisidian Antioch, different from the Syrian Antioch. And then to these cities of Iconium, Lystra, and Derbe. This is probably the Galatian churches, at least in my understanding. And then they turn around and come back. And it's interesting that you can see, this is not a long trip. This, let's say Iconium, it's very likely that they came through Iconium, and then maybe 6 months later, on their way back, come back through, and on that return journey, the first time they are preaching the gospel and initially discipling those new believers, and they get them together in groups, and when they come back 6 months later, they appoint elders. They appoint elders based on what they've seen in the growth of the believers there, who's faithful, who's ministering to others, and they're confident that they are appointing the person that God is raising up. So this, and then when they get all the way back to Antioch, they follow most of the same path back. They get back to Antioch. And just as the Holy Spirit had said when he told the church, setting them apart for the work that I called them to a long time ago, the work of a missionary, the work of this New Testament apostle, now they go and they report on the work. And it's clear if you read chapters 13 and 14, the work is evangelism, discipleship, and church planting. That is the core task of missions. That is the work that God called these men to do. And then they go down, we know they go down to Jerusalem. They have the Jerusalem Council because there's all this question about, is it really okay for pagans to come to Christ, Gentiles who have no background, who don't follow the law? And the church affirms, strongly affirms in Acts 15 that we're all saved by grace. You don't have to become a Jew first in order to be a Christian. Then we get the second journey, and a second. I think that makes this like number 7. They go back up to Antioch, and then they go back through the area of Galatia where they had ministered before. Maybe it's been a year now or so, but they're still concerned about those believers, and they go back and check on them, and then they head over through Galatia again, and then the Lord leads them to jump over into Macedonia. That call of the men of Macedonia to jump over into Macedonia, which seems to have been a surprise to Paul. Macedonia and Achaia are the heart of the Greek world, and maybe that Paul had probably never been there. He didn't seem to be heading clearly in that direction until this happened. But again, later he can talk about that sphere. This is where God was leading, and then they move down into Achaia, and they're in Athens and Corinth and this area, and then they get back to Ephesus briefly, and then they go to Jerusalem. So we're talking about an expansion, a huge expansion here. The team is expanding. The area that they've covered is expanding. Those churches planted in each city has expanded the witness into multiple areas and provinces. So God is really blessing this. It's really growing. And then we get the third journey again, and they're going back to some of the same places again. They are strengthening churches for sure. They're continuing to preach. They're going to new places. And again, they're just strengthening and particularly expanding the ministry. And then they get back to Jerusalem, and Paul gets captured, and now he's taken back to Rome, where he's going to spend some time under lock and key there in the city of Rome. Now, that basically is where Acts ends the story, but that's not the end of the story, because we see from other books in the New Testament that this is not where Paul died, at least at this time. Things keep going. Paul's ministry continues. So I'm just going to refer to Acts 29 travel, the stuff that happens after the 28th chapter. Paul declared to Rome, to the church in Rome, his intention to go to Spain because nobody had been preaching there yet. And remember, that's sort of in the same direction as the sphere. And all the early church, the first and second century church, wholeheartedly agreed that Paul did go to Spain and that he did do his ministry, and that was one of the foundations of the church in Spain. So I see no reason to doubt that. We know that he went to Crete. He took Titus with him to Crete, and then he kept going, and he left Titus behind to take that church to the next level, mostly by choosing the right person to be the leader, the qualified person. And so you get his letter to Titus is all about the follow-up to this visit. So there's ongoing ministry that's after the book of Acts. And then we know that he winds up in Rome again. It seems like not the first trip. He did these other things, and then he gets back to Rome, and it is then probably on that second trip that Paul is martyred in the city of Rome. Well, here's one chronology of Paul's ministry then. This is again from Eckhart Schnabel. who I really like. He's one of the best New Testament scholars who gets mission. There's a lot of great scholars who, they'll make comments about mission and all, but Schnabel, I think, really gets mission. He asks a lot of the right questions. He notes a lot of the important pieces, and so I like to use Schnabel, and he's got several books on this. So somewhere around 31 or 32, as we used to say, AD, Paul was converted and he goes to Damascus. That was immediate. And then around the year 33, he's in Arabia, and then again gets in trouble, and so either in 33 or 34, he makes that initial visit to Jerusalem and Judea. And then somewhere around 34 or so, he gets back to Tarsus and is there perhaps 7 or 8 years. That seems to be a common understanding. And then Barnabas goes and gets him, and he's in Antioch there, strengthening that church. And we have really the first really strong, growing community of mostly Gentile believers there in the city of Antioch. Then he makes that second visit to Jerusalem for that Jerusalem Council, or in the year around 44. 45 to 47, they're back to Cyprus and Galatia, and then that's the Jerusalem Council there in 48. Then Macedonia and Achaia, that jumping over out of the province of Asia and in that area over into what is really Greece, what we would think of as the ancient center of Greece. And then somewhere around 51, he makes the third visit to Jerusalem. And then he gets to Ephesus, where he had wanted to go earlier probably, and the Spirit told him not now, and he gets back, and he stays there a long time. I think when we see Paul stay a long time in a large city, he left a lot of places because he had to. It's not part of the plan. He just had to run. But in the larger cities, Paul seems to have been able to preach openly and boldly. But there's so much going on, and there are people from all over the world, and there's new ideas and probably multiple temples and all kinds of things. Paul could stay there for maybe as long as 3 years. He spends a longer time in Corinth. It's a city like that also. Antioch is like that. So those 3 cities, he stays in a good portion. These are not just journeys. These we would call these. That's actually a missionary term. He was there for quite some time, establishing multiple house churches and raising up leaders in those places. And then we don't know when, but he says he had already been all the way around to Illyricum. So maybe after that, in around 56. Then he's in Caesarea, we know, waiting trial, sort of in prison there. Then he gets to Rome. And then after that, somehow, he goes to Spain and probably then to Crete and then probably back to Rome. So, oh my goodness, look at that, folks. It appears over 30 years. Now, it's true, most of what's in Acts, the part that we have the most information about and is about 10 years. And that's maybe the most productive part of Paul's ministry. That first, second, and third journey, which really weren't, they were the 6th, 7th, and 8th maybe of his missionary journeys. But there's the whole timeline. And I think it's really, it's good that we have all that information about the middle 10 years after he had a number of years of ministry. Then he has that really great, wonderful time in the middle. I mean, wonderful time is a hard time. He's persecuted the whole time. He gets thrown in prison, all that too. And then we have what might be the winding down years later on, but not winding down that he's quit. He is still pushing, and he's still expanding the ministry. But it's really heartening to me to be able to see from the moment that Paul was called to this task around 31 or 32 until his death over 30 years later, Paul is pursuing this ministry that God has given him? Well, I'm just going to give you how it helps me to think through this, and you don't have to use this, but you do need to have a way of describing all of this. I think it's really simple. The simplest way to put all this early stuff together is to talk about the early efforts. They are mentioned in the Bible, Damascus, Arabia, Jerusalem, Judea, something like that. And then the time in Tarsus and Cilicia, that was a significant amount of time. So I think that we need to recognize the length of that time. And then he goes, Barnabas gets him and they go to Antioch, and that's a very significant time because of the uniqueness of the new church there. And then we get that journey to Cyprus and Galatia, and then going back. Then we get Jerusalem, and from Jerusalem to Macedonia and Achaia. That's with Silas and Timothy, not with Barnabas. Barnabas has gone another way. And then we get mostly a trip to Ephesus and to Asia, and we know the gospel spread out from there to Colossae and all across the province. And so some of the people that are part of the team there, Timothy still, Luke has joined him, and Priscilla and Aquila, who are partners with Paul in numerous places, it appears. And then somewhere, we don't know when and how, but somewhere he gets to Illyricum. It seems that's what he means when he says from Jerusalem all the way to Illyricum. And then we get prison ministry in Caesarea and Rome. And Paul is mostly writing, but he's also witnessing to the guards. People are coming in, and he's probably advising and counseling and praying. So there's ministry going on. It's just a different kind of ministry than he probably intended. And then if we simplify the last part of his ministry, we get Spain and Crete, at least, there may be other places, and Rome. So that's one way to sort of summarize all of this. Over 30 years of ministry of Paul carrying out his calling to be an apostle, a missionary, a pioneering, gospel preaching, disciple making, and pioneer church planting missionary. That is the model that we have in the New Testament of missions.